So we're going to move on to our next interview with our expert, Oni Blair from Link Houston. I see Ani there. Hi there. Thanks for joining us today. And Ani's a regular partner who helps the city and the region. And so Ani, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do related to transportation?
Sure. Hi, my name is Oni Blair. I'm the Executive Director of Link Houston. Link Houston advocates for a robust and equitable transportation network so that all people can reach opportunity. Our organization combines community engagement and the power of storytelling from people in the community, along with data informed research, meaning we draw from all different sources to be able to analyze what's happening and to use that information, qualitative and quantitative information, to shape how decisions are changed or are made. Because we believe that it's not enough to change a single sidewalk or a crosswalk. What's most important is to change the system and to make sure that it works for everyone, whether or not you're here to be there to watch and monitor every single decision that's made.
Excellent. Thanks, Ani. And thank you for joining us tonight. So what's the first thing you think of when I say safe streets?
So I am a person who has used all different forms of transportation for a majority of my life. I have three kids and a husband, and we are a one-car household. And my parents live here in town, and both of my parents have had knee surgery, and so they both have mobility issues. So for me, safe streets is something that works for all of us. It's something that works for me walking with my 3-year-old or my 4-year-old, and it's something that works for me when I'm walking with my mom, that there's enough time to get across, that if we're walking, if we're biking, that it's safe enough for my children to be able to share the streets with other people as they're moving along, that they can also be out in the street. It's safe enough that when we're driving as a family, that I can see, their cars aren't parked blocking the way, but that we can safely move about the city and not be afraid of something happening to us every time we get in a car. So a safe street means one that works for us regardless of our age or our size or our ability, and that it works all the time regardless of how we're traveling.
So Houston's a pretty big place, 670 square miles. We have a lot of different communities and neighborhoods. So how do you think communities relate to or rely on streets in different ways?
I think that's a great question, and one that really resonates right now at this time. In the COVID-19 time, I think something that's highlighted is there's this perception that streets and especially sidewalks and bikeways are a luxury, or that it's something that other people use, or it's something that's for recreation. And now, when many people are at home, they're seeing that that's not necessarily the case, and it's something that in our most recent research in May, we launched an affordable housing and transportation report. And I heard this repeatedly. We looked at transit, walking, biking access, and where it's high quality in Houston. And people would ask, well, why do you care about sidewalks and bikeways? I mean, that's recreational. And it's important to always emphasize that it depends on where you sit. Everybody has to be able to move at some point and probably has the need for a sidewalk regardless of whether one's there. So when I think of our different interactions with streets, I think of people just trying to get to where they're going. And if they are walking to walk their child to school, or you're walking to the grocery store, or you're walking to the park, or you're walking to your car, you still need to be able to have that sidewalk. If you have a disability, you need that sidewalk to not only be there, but to be in great shape, to be unobstructed, to be wide enough that you can make it through, hopefully with somebody else walking with you as well. These aren't just luxuries, these are necessities. And they're especially necessities if we want our streets to be safe. If you don't have them, the result is worse. It means that you're putting people without 2 tons of metal around them to be in the same realm as a car that's zooming down the street. And so when we don't have it, the risk is much, much greater than if we do have them and we provide an option for people to use them. And the reality is that our streets are there for people to reach a destination and to reach opportunity. That may be a medical appointment, it may be work, it may be just getting home, it may be to go to the park. but it doesn't really matter. That's your choice in what you're doing and how you're using it, but it should be there for everyone.
And do you have any experience or examples of the way our streets aren't actually working for everybody differently in different communities?
Yes, that's also a great question. I think that we can hypothesize how they're not working. And we know that in communities, especially communities of color, there have been historic disinvestments in communities. And so you don't see sidewalks. You see that the sidewalks are small, or that the bikeways may not be there, or the streets are don't line up, or the signals aren't there, or the cross signal doesn't work anymore. But the reality is, we can also see it from a couple of different metrics. So one is looking at crash data. Lauren mentioned earlier, and you've mentioned, David, the crash data and the overlays that the city has been working on to understand where crashes are happening. We know in Houston that crashes happen everywhere. They don't discriminate, but where we see also the impact that these lack of investments is happening is who they're happening to. And so we see that communities of color are disproportionately represented on crashes and crash information. That doesn't mean that somebody's out there targeting people of color, but it means that maybe where people of color are living, that we don't have the right infrastructure historically, and that we need to make some systemic changes to make sure that that doesn't happen. We see the same thing with people walking. People walking or even biking make up 2% approximately of the crashes, but 25% of those killed. There's a problem there. So when people look at one figure, they're like, well, it's not that many. But if you look at who's actually dying from the crash unnecessarily, then we have a huge problem. And that tells us that something's wrong and that we're not investing in the right places. We're not doing the right sorts of infrastructure or design, or the straight outlet lines with our cities and our streets and how people interact with them. And we're not recognizing or valuing who is using the streets and why they're using them for. If we consistently and historically have the same problems over and over again, and we can see them in our data.
We've spoken a lot about really the basis of Vision Zero, fatalities and serious injuries. And earlier we had a lot of people put in the chat that those goals should be zero fatalities, zero crashes, zero serious injuries. What about beyond that? What other benefits do Safe Streets help create for Houston?
As I mentioned in our own mission statement, our mission statement focuses on access to opportunity, and every street provides that. So if it's you going to work, going home, going to take your kids to school, going to a medical appointment, going to get healthy food, it doesn't matter how you're moving, it's a street, and for it to move safely, that's an opportunity for you to reach that. And until we can beam ourselves up somewhere, we're going to be relying on streets to do that. And so we need to invest in them and make sure that everyone has the opportunity to do so safely. I think the other benefit is that as we look ahead, Mayor Turner has announced a lot of really aspirational goals, including a new resilience strategy and a climate action plan. And what I often hear Houstonians say is like, those goals are nice and they have nothing against those goals. But then they talk about, well, we're a driving city and we're a behavior, and you have to have a behavior change or a cultural change until people will get out in their cars. And that there's a risk for getting out of your car and walking or biking or using the train or using the bus. I think that all of these conversations are tied. Yes, it does require a cultural change to be able to even think of or consider a new option. And for there to be a cultural change, you have to think it's safe. You want your children to be safe. You want to be safe. You want your family and friends to be safe. And so, starting with the Vision Zero strategy is important, because the exponential benefit is not only are we safe, but it provides us opportunities to explore other ways of moving around. I don't want to get in my car to go to the park. I would like to be able to walk to the park, and I will do so if it's safe. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And once you do that, the added benefit is you open up so many more opportunities. And those opportunities have an economic benefit. People walking by a store are more likely to stop and actually go in. People, the health benefits for being able to move around and to be on, moving through a place outside of a vehicle, to be able to spend time with people, and ultimately to be able to have an impact on our climate and resilience of our city may seem lofty, but they start with the ability for us to do so safely.
The ability for us to do so safely. That's a great way to say it. Thank you. I'll open it up. If anybody has questions for Ani, if they'd like to put those in the chat, please. And I'm going to ask Ani, my favorite question to ask people. What's your favorite street anywhere, whether in Houston or anywhere around the world?
So off and on from living in Houston, where I call home, I've also lived in Washington, D.C., and I love H Street Northeast. It is it's just an intersection of a lot of things. It's mostly well, it's a changing community, but a historically Black community, and it used to be the old Main Street, and is a really amazing place. But I think of it because I like it because it's got bus lines, it's got a trolley, it connects to a train that goes around the city and connects to Baltimore and the commuter train. It's got really wide sidewalks and every kind of store, from Whole Foods to, like just regular streetwear and shoes, and it's got tons of restaurants, and I love being there, and I love how people use the streets, like at all hours of the day or night, the faith communities, the kids, neighborhoods, tourists, local folks. It's a street for everyone, and it's a fun place to be. Locally, my favorite street is probably just my own street, and I won't say where I live, but I do like my street. It's got small sidewalks, but people slow down when my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old are new bike riders as of last month, and I kind of fell in love with my street again because people go slow enough that they stop and they see them and they'll wave and let them go past, and the neighbors come out on the sidewalks and kind of have conversations from the sidewalks with each other, and it feels like a community, and I love that, and I see it in the fact that my 3-year-old and my 4-year-old have relationships with their 80-year-old neighbors who leave gifts on the porch for them. That starts with being able to like be outside safely.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ani. I don't see any more questions in the chat. We hope you'll stay for a while, and if your kids want to join us on the call, they're welcome too.